So we're halfway through our conference today, our AIDS Focus conference on advocacy. And Helena and I are just discussing some of the highlights today. I mean, we've seen people from many different places, haven't we, today?
Yes. I think it was very good and very interesting that we had people from the most affected countries like Southern Africa, South Africa, from Zimbabwe, Tanzania, which shared so much in common. But we also had somebody from India, which is still is a low prevalence country. But we see same issues coming up, same ways of doing advocacy. That I think was very interesting to see.
I agree, because I think it's interesting to hear about advocacy experiences from a different setting, because it's the same problem, different degrees of prevalence, but people are dealing with this in a different way, and there's a lot to learn from both settings.
And one person I felt was especially impressive was Nkosi Komula, the chairperson of the Treatment Action Campaign. And TAC actually is the world's most effective AIDS campaign or AIDS organization. And we could feel her. They have so much experience and they have so much commitment. And it looks like they never get tired on really standing up and fighting for the rights of people living with HIV and AIDS.
I agree. I felt I learned a lot from that presentation, because you know, sometimes we find we're working upstream and you actually forget about the exclusion of people who probably have the most to say about HIV and AIDS. I was particularly surprised when she said, as an activist, she's often has to fight her way into a discussion forum and is then given a place at the back and is not part of the agenda. That for me was a real surprise. And I felt, apart from the human rights issues around that, it was the loss of information that's feeding into the policy and practice that I think is particularly shocking and a great loss.
Yeah, and I think, and that's also at the same time the chance of NGOs like we are, of AIDS Focus, that now we can get this information. We are in dialogue, we are in touch, and so if we find an opening someplace to get into these discussions, we use it. It would be best, of course, if people themselves speak up for themselves. That's what we want. But we can do it in a supportive way also. Maybe some doors are open for us, or which are closed for them, and the other way around. So I think we'll have to use the openings which are there.
Yes. I also liked today how we had from South Africa not only the presentation by Nonks, our activist, but we also had a more academic perspective from Edward Graeber, who was talking about his research on activism. And this I thought was very important, because he was actually bringing home to us that we all recognise and acknowledge that activism is important and that it works, but we don't know how it works. And I think it was quite key that he talked to us about how he's trying to develop indicators and to capture how activism has an impact. And at the moment, I know he's not so satisfied with the indicators, because he said he's just using PMTCT and antiretroviral uptake, and of course there are many things affecting that. But I think it's a start, and you know, given that we are dealing with donor fatigue, and even as the activists are saying, activism fatigue, it's particularly important that we develop the evidence base on activism.
So I think there still is so much work to be done, because what we have stories, we have evidence of cases, but doing it in a more systematic way, how they succeed. Like, for instance, also our guest from Zimbabwe, Joshua, they are doing grassroots advocacy from the bottom up, And they are filling in now these monitoring sheets and say, what is the issue we learned from the people? Well, how did we go about it? Well, how did we succeed? Who were the partners and things like that? So this also helps us to get some evidence and also to learn which activities in which contexts are most effective. Though that also Edward Graeber said that advocacy is very context specific.
Yes, yes.
It's not everywhere the same.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, when you consider, if we just take the African continent, the different attitudes to men who have sex with men, which can be from tolerance at best to persecution and people being declared outlaws. So, yeah, I agree. I think that's a very important point that he made about the importance of context. I also like thinking about Joshua's presentation on Zimbabwe. I really like to hear more about the meaningful involvement of people living with HIV, because we've moved through the process of greater involvement of people living with HIV and AIDS, and I think it's really nice to see this more honed about being a meaningful engagement, because one sometimes finds oneself on committees or in meetings and you feel there's only been an effort towards having a token representation, and it's very different creating a platform whereby people feel that they're welcome to engage and they're valued as part of the process. So that was very nice to hear about his activities in Masvingo in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, no, when we also were choosing participants from the South, I was aware of this principle that we need some positive people here. Yeah. So so it was good we have it, because they speak differently. The way they are affected, they are different, even if they are good analysts at the same time. But it's about their life, and they also went. I think people living with AIDS who come forward already went a long way to accept that they are different, they have the virus, and stand up even if there is so much stigma and discrimination everywhere. And I think we need people like this.
I think I completely admire people who are aware that they are positive and speak out about this, because depending upon the context, I mean, people take huge risks with this, huge personal and even economic risks. I've heard of people even being ejected from family businesses just for being known to have tested. It's a huge risk that I think in our own context in Switzerland we can barely imagine. I think also in terms of context, I think today it was very important that we considered different types of, different groups of people within a particular setting. Paulina from Tanzania was discussing, of course, children. And I think this is a very special challenge in terms of advocacy, because children are different because they don't have the life experience to negotiate and speak in the way that adults do. They just haven't had that amount, they haven't lived that amount of life to do that. And yet they're especially vulnerable, because most children affected by AIDS are either single or double orphans. And so, of course, they suffer from the lack of adult protection, the lack of income, food insecurity, and that, of course, renders them very vulnerable to because they may not access their basic needs, and so are open to exploitation by adults. So I thought it was particularly interesting to have that brought into the advocacy issue today.
Very much, very much. Even if it's much more difficult. So that's why she also talked about this psychosocial support they give. So she understood it. That was interesting also as part of advocacy work. Strengthen children, strengthen young people through psychosocial support so that they can claim their own rights. So I think that's very special with children.
Yes.
It's also with adults like this, but it's more so with,
yes.
really with children. They are more vulnerable, that's clear.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting because we focus, like many organisations in the development community, on Africa, because of course Africa has the greatest burden in terms of HIV and AIDS. I thought it was really refreshing to have Ashish come in and bring in the mix of the advocacy situation in the Punjab. And it was interesting also to hear his take on the situation regarding the context of what he called corruption, the managing of funds, and how it's very important in terms of advocacy to hold health systems and health services to account for what they should be delivering for people living with HIV and people living with AIDS.
And okay, he also talked wider, not just only the HIV-affected people, also like mothers' health or health of children. And there was one question from the ground asking, do you face any difficulties doing advocacy work? And the interesting thing, he said, yes, we had some difficulties when it was about child health and child immunization, because the men thought that's women's issue. But if they worked with the people living with AIDS, those people, they were very keen because they were affected themselves. So he said it was easier, which surprised me because I felt they are more stigmatized, but in this situation it's different.
So this is just my second year with on the AIDS Focus Steering Committee. So my second conference as a facilitator. That's not true, is it?
Your third, I think.
My third, okay. I'll start again. So this is my third AIDS Focus conference, and Helena, of course, you've been here from the start. What are some of the conferences that we've had in the past? I'm trying to think back.
Our first conference, I think it's 8 or 9 years ago, I'm not even sure anymore, was we chose the title Living with HIV, and we had on treatment. And I remember that time, it's not even so long ago, that there was the impression treatment, you cannot do it in the South. It's not possible, because people are not equipped for doing it. So that was our first conference, I felt. That's a very important issue. And others like we had, it's now very popular too, we called it Positive Motherhood. It's about women who are HIV positive on the horizontal HIV transmission, we call it. Not mother to child, but it was the vertical HIV transmission. So that was another issue we discussed. Or last year, we had linking HIV and sexual and reproductive health and rights, which opens up again from, as we discussed, not only HIV, but we have to link it with other health issues of people. Either they are affected by HIV or they are not affected. It's important. And one interesting one was also on culture and condoms. And we had a street play performed by Africans living in Switzerland on the condoms. Also, like, yes, okay, the question was more than condoms. So how can we bring the messages across in a culturally appropriate way? So that was another issue. Another one we had, it's similar to the, somehow in many ways similar to the days, is the future of the global AIDS response. That's 2 years back, when we already saw that the finances will get less and the need for it will grow. So how to go about it? That was another interesting topic.
I remember also I came as a participant several years ago, and it was HIV and livelihoods.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
this was particularly interesting because I think for me it gelled the whole issues that HIV is having this circular interrelationship with livelihoods, in that the epidemic itself causes a fall in agricultural production, and that food insecurity also is a driver of HIV and AIDS. And I think one of the things that came across very well at that conference was the extreme vulnerability of women and children, because as men were dying of HIV, women and children were being disinherited from property. So even though they may not have been HIV positive themselves, they were thrown into poverty, and their livelihoods were finished with the death of the male head of the household.
It's very true. That was also very impressive, and we were among the first who took up the issue of land grabbing because of HIV.
Yes,
yeah. It's really there. And I'm already thinking of next year's conference topic. Yes, listening. What are issues? You can help also. Like one of the issues, like Nongs took up HIV and TB co-infection. That people might get medication for HIV, but they will die of TB.
Yes.
I think this could be an issue, but that's just one came up today.
I think it's really topical because, again, I think all things in development, and especially in health, it's like we're having to juggle priorities and to perform triage all the time. But really, HIV and TB have to go together because of their close associations, because of the level of co-infection, and the tragedy of people adhering to medication for HIV, but then dying of TB because they're not getting the treatment. So I think that would be a really a very topical issue to discuss next year.
Yeah, and maybe some more issues will come up today.
Yeah, exactly.